All right, and we are recording.
Okay. Thank you. Welcome everyone to our first webinar for the fall semester for the Center of Sustainable Energy and Environmental Engineering at ECU. Our webinar today titled Harnessing Biochar for Soil Amendment and Green Concrete Advancement. This is just a background about the center. The mission of the center is to promote, enhance, and serve. We do work related to pollution prevention program. We do on-site energy and lean assessment, regional and on-site P2 energy training, regional workshop, technical and engineering support, and also cash flow and market analysis return on investment. The webinar for today, we have two speakers. Please mute your microphone and save your question until the end. Our first speaker is Dr. Shirzad, is an assistant professor at App State University, specializing in field of sustainable construction materials. Dr. Shirzad has a PhD from Louisiana State University. She is a dedicated researcher with a passion for advancing sustainable practices in the construction industry with a focus on innovative solution. She has contributed to the field through her research, which has been published in various peer-reviewed journals. Dr. Shirzad's expertise lies in the exploring eco-friendly construction materials and techniques that minimize environmental impact while maximizing structure integrity. She is committed to shaping the future of sustainable construction through her academic contribution and active engagement in the academic community. Our second speaker is Dr. Ferrell, is an assistant department chair and assistant professor at App State in the Department of Sustainable Technology and the Built Environment. His specialists include solar thermal energy, biofuels and biosystems, and appropriate technology in the developing world. We will start with Dr. Shirzad, then we will move to Dr. Ferrell.
Thank you, Karen. I just want to confirm that you can see my slide in the presentation file.
Yes, we can.
Okay, hello everybody. So the presentation today or today's webinar is about harnessing biochar for soil amendment and green concrete advancements. I will start by providing a definition or the production process of biochar. Biochar is produced from the thermal decomposition of biomass in the absence of oxygen. So it's an oxygen-free thermochemical process that we use for production of biochar from different types of biomass. The feedstock that can be used for production of biochar includes wood and forestry waste, food waste, agricultural waste, marine waste, or animal waste. And the two main approaches that are used for this thermochemical decomposition of biomass material are pyrolysis and gasification. So this is basically the process that we go through to produce biochar from different types of biomass. But here at App State, we are looking into the application or use of wood and forestry waste for production of biochar. As I mentioned earlier, based on the topic of this presentation, for use of this material for soil amendment, and also another application that we are looking into it at Appalachian State University is the use of wood-based biochar for production of green concrete with a lower carbon footprint. Why are we working on this project? Well, the main reason is that every year a huge amount of wood and forestry waste is landfilled. What is wood waste? Waste product of wood include wood residue in a mechanically shredded form. It can be bark, sawdust, chips, hog fuel, slabs, trimming, different types of products that are produced during the production of different type of wood materials or wood products. The number that I have in this slide is just to show you how much material is being landfilled each year. So in 2018, around 12.2 million tons of wood were landfilled, which is around 8.3% of all municipal solid waste landfill that year. In addition to this, we also have a huge number of trees removed from private or public areas such as parks or house or different area of the city because of different issues such as a storm, disease, insects, or development of that area. So again, a huge amount of wood waste landfilled each year, and we are looking into different techniques that we can use to basically recycle or reuse this waste material in other areas, such as the use for soil amendments or use as a construction material. Another number that I have in this slide is from US Environmental Protection Agency, EPA. EPA estimated that the amount of wood waste generated between 1900 to 2065 is around 6.9 billion metric tons, and a cumulative of 10.5 billion metric tons of wood will be in service by 2065. So that was just an introduction to go over why it is so important to look at wood and forestry waste as a source of material that can be used to produce biochar for soil application and also to use it as a construction materials. I'll give it back to Jeremy, my colleague, so he can continue this presentation and talk about our Nexus project here and the application of biochar for soil amendments.
Okay, thanks, Sherry. Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Jeremy Ferrell, and I just want to thank Carol and Melissa for organizing this this webinar series on pollution prevention. Thanks for including us, and we're happy to be here to talk about our work in biochar. And I'm going to talk a little bit about biochar as a soil amendment, and first talk about where some of this work is happening at our what we call our Nexus project. Nexus is sort of the connection of many different points, and a lot of the points are waste to energy and have organic nutrient cycling, and so waste to energy and waste recycling is very much a part of this, and it really is it's a greenhouse with some different types of technologies in it and around our facility. This is right next to the Watauga County landfill, just a few miles from campus, and we have different ways to make biochar with pyrolysis. We have a few pyrolysis techniques I'll talk about in a minute, hydroponics and aquaponics system, and we have solar energy included in these different systems, including solar thermal and photovoltaic array. There is an anaerobic digester to take wet waste such as animal manures or food waste. We generally, if they're wet waste materials, we will consider digesting them. If they're dry, cellulosic, or woody, they will be better suited to be a biochar feedstock. And then we also have a few plots where we grow some different promising biochar crops, softwood biochar species such as hybrid poplar, which grow very quickly. We've also worked with hardwood species, the typical kind of species you might see and use it for in your fireplace. And we've also looked at very fast growing grasses such as Arundodonax and Miscanthus. Okay, so let's go to the next slide and talk a little bit about the soil amendment. Okay, so yeah, I'm going to talk about soil amendment. Charcoal is is literally just what's left over after you have a fire. When you put it in the soil or in the ground or use it in agriculture, we call it biochar. Some people call it agrochar. But of course, this is just charcoal. It can be continued to be cleaned and upgraded and used for things like water and air filtration. Okay, next slide. All right, so the biochar crossroads, I'm calling it, is this interesting place where biochar is finding itself in this day and age, sort of at this convergence of a lot of really important areas that we're working in, including climate, energy, soil enhancement, and waste management. So char, especially when it comes from waste materials, such as materials diverted from the landfill that Sherry just talked about, or underutilized woody materials such as right-of-way utility cuttings that ended up getting chipped and piled. They continue to decompose and emit carbon dioxide. From a climate standpoint, biochar can be part of an engineered carbon sink. So when we think, I think we're all getting to the point now where we recognize that we can't just reduce emissions to reach our goals of 1.5 or 2 degrees Celsius. We actually need to start removing carbon dioxide from our atmosphere. And so biochar is considered an engineered carbon sink and using the soil as a sink. Okay, so when we make biochar, in this way I'll talk a little bit about the techniques. The literature estimates that about half of that charcoal is recalcitrant. That means that it stays in the soil from several decades to 2,000 years. There's a lot of research that's happening around this, but we have archaeological evidence that char from places like the Amazon and Mesoamerica has been around for over 1,000 years. And so what this really means is that biochar can sequester carbon. Okay, and when you think about agriculture in the United States, we know that we have vast amount of topsoil that's been lost. Okay, we have hypoxia areas in the Gulf of Mexico. We have extreme runoff. So biochar is also considered a way to rapidly regenerate soils. All right, so that kind of speaks to the soil enhancement. And in the tree over there, we see the capturing, the reduction of nitrous oxides and methane soil emissions that can happen, especially with excessive fertilizer use. And we see the improved soil fertility and soil health. The bottom left picture is from the Drawdown project. Hopefully you all are familiar with Project Drawdown. It's a consortium of universities and experts really focused on climate and climate change and on solutions that they consider are some of the best ways to address the climate crisis. And they consider biochar one of those solutions. You can see this is a simple way that it's made here in a batch system. And so biochar in terms of ecosystem restoration, regenerative agriculture, and mitigation. And then the last picture here on the bottom right, I don't know if anybody recognizes this person. This is James Lovelock. He's an English physicist. He actually passed away last year at 103 years old, but he was one of the co-founders of the Gaia theory. So some of you all have probably heard about the Gaia theory that basically says that the Earth is a self-regulating system where living organisms interact with inorganic organisms and form this synergetic, self-regulating, yet complex system. And toward the ends of his life, James Lovelock here was pretty pessimistic on the odds of what our planet would look like. But he did say that one way that we could save ourselves is through the massive burial of charcoal or carbon. In the form of biochar, where farmers turn agricultural waste into charcoal and bury it. So this was from New Scientist magazine a few years back. Anyway, so I just wanted to put that in there as a little background on this. Okay, let's go to the next slide, please. Okay, so I've been talking a little bit about some of the different uses, but we're going to focus now on biochar as a soil amendment. So this little handful of charcoal here in the picture contains about the surface area of a football field. Okay, so this is highly porous structure. So what does that mean? it improves water, nutrient, and oxygen retention and availability. Okay, and like other organic material, it also improves infiltration, drainage, and air movement. So these are all things that we need in the soil. It's especially beneficial in heavy soils like clay soils. This biochar also has a high cation exchange capacity, which is really important for holding on to nutrients like phosphates and nitrates, where plants will then in turn use the sugars that they produce through photosynthesis and through microbial interfacing. They'll free up these cations in exchange for some glucose and some sugar, and the plant will be able to uptake those nutrients. And so high CEC materials, clays have high CEC, so does organics, and so does biochar, allows for increased storage of nutrients and retention of those nutrients. And then thirdly, as I just mentioned, all this surface area, you can think about all these micropores, macropores. They provide the habitat for soil microbiome. And we continue to learn more and more about this amazing soil microbiome that facilitates nutrient transfer and uptake for plants. And so what does this all mean? Well, there was a study that in the Lehman and Joseph biochar book that tried to generalize what applying biochar would mean. And this meta-analysis from 2015 says that if random biochars were indiscriminately applied globally at an application rate of 50 tons per acre, that would generate mean yield increase of about 18%. So it's very, very broad, very much an overview, but the idea is that biochar will lead to an increase in yield, which is pretty interesting and I think and exciting from a food production standpoint. Okay, let's go to the next slide. Okay, so I'm going to talk a little bit about ways to make biochar, and these are really simple, low-cost ways that we have been working with. We've been working with biochar for a few years and have really settled on what's simple and low cost. As Sherry mentioned earlier, with gasification, you have gaseous products like syngas, like methane, fuels. There's also an oil fraction called pie oil, lots of different uses for these. But for making biochar and getting it out into the farming community, which is what we've been doing the last couple of years, we have used some relatively simple ways. And this first series of pictures is called a TLUD, or a top-lit updraft gasifier. And if you look at the picture on the left, you can see it's just a 55-gallon steel drum, nothing fancy. But the very bottom of that drum, there's these tiny holes that are drilled into it, so it allows for air to circulate up into the barrel. It is then loaded with dry lignocellulosic materials like hardwood or softwood or grasses. You can see the grasses there in the third picture. And then it's fitted with another part of a drum and a chimney, and we had someone do some nice plasma torch cutting and they made the little moon and stars for fun. But it creates a chimney effect, and it uses the gasification effect to pyrolyze the material very quickly. And this happens, it happens quite quickly, maybe 30 minutes or so. And once the fire is going, after a few minutes, you get a very clean burn, almost like you were burning natural gas. It's really impressive how clean it burns. We've learned by timing that it needs to be quenched after a period of time, and then we usually just use water to stop the fire and create our coals. Okay, so this is one technique we like. One of the good things about the TLUD is that you can load it with things like wood chips, things that would otherwise pack, because if you ever tried to start a fire with sawdust, you know that doesn't work very well because there's no air movement. So if you try to start a fire with wood chips, then you get the same kind of effect. It's hard for air to move and to get complete combustion. But what the top-lit updraft is that the fire actually moves from the top down through the vessel. Okay, so you can use a lot of different size, particle size materials to do this. The downside is that it is a batch. You have to load it, run the gasification, and then unload it. Okay, let's go to the next slide here. Okay, this is another simple kiln that we have been using, it was inspired by USDA Forest Service, and they have called it the Oregon Kiln. And it's an open source technology. We actually downloaded the plans there on the left, a little CAD drawing with the, we downloaded those plans and set out to build several of these. You can see in the top picture there, they're stackable and they're in the back of a pickup truck. And one of the main ideas driving the Forest Service adoption of biochar production was to reduce the wood, the debris and the wood litter in the western United States that where fire has been suppressed. And now when they do have fires, they have very intense high temperature fires that are quite devastating. And so some of the goal here was to actually reduce that wood load, make biochar in situ, leave it there. And so we built a few of these, and we have started this biochar kiln loaner program, and we have a couple of these kilns out in some of the farm communities around Boone area. This is actually the picture of the bottom right here is actually in my neighborhood. We did a clearing. We had some dead trees that were down, and we made in this, it's about 4 feet by 4 feet, 2 feet tall. We were able to make about 100 gallons of biochar that we use in a garden. So this is again, it's very low tech. Anybody can operate this kiln. There's really nothing secretive about it. Only thing is, once you get a nice bed of coals, that's when you want to quench the fire. So you can continually build it up until you have a nice layer of coals, and then quench it. Usually with water is what we do. If you were in a dry area like out west somewhere, you could put earth or sand on top of it. Okay, so let's go to the next slide. All right, so as a soil amendment, one of the things we're most interested in is seeing how plants respond to biochar. If you do look for literature around biochar, you will find lots and lots of research that's done on the physical and chemical properties of it, how to make it, how to optimize it. But what you will find considerably less of is how it has affected plant growth in actual real world trials that are out in the field. So we have started a few of these, and we are partnering with the Patterson School in Lenoir, which is just about 30 minutes from Boone in Caldwell County. And we're using a fast growing species called hybrid poplar. It's Populus genus. It grows very quickly, and you can propagate it vegetatively, which means you can just take a stake, a cutting, put it in the ground, and it will root, which is pretty remarkable. And so this is from earlier this year. In March, we went out and planted these stakes in the ground, and half of them there's 24 total, and there's 12 control without any char, and 12 that do have char. It's about a 10% addition of softwood pine biochar. This was construction wood waste, actually, from our construction tech lab, where there's a lot of 2x4 untreated pine waste that would otherwise be landfilled. So this is about 2 gallons per tree, and so far the trees have done quite well. Timing is really critical for this type of propagation, but we have seen good growth. So we're really going to be interested to follow this over the next several years, and we have about a 5-year agreement with the Patterson before we'll need to discuss removing them or not. So we have several years to look at the trees. These are typically harvested in 3 or 4 year rotations. Okay, so this is one growing test. We can go to the next slide. And then this another thing that I think it's really important to know about biochar is that biochar applied directly to the rooting zone of a plant, straight from its production, without any kind of treatment, will actually have a negative effect on that plant. So why is that? Well, because that dry char that has just been pyrolyzed is trying to absorb cations, so those would be nutrients, and it's also trying to absorb water. So raw biochar straight out of production should not ever be applied directly into a garden or an agricultural field. All right, it should be treated and or inoculated or charged. There's a couple different ways to describe that. So the idea of charging this biochar with nutrients is really important. And how long does it take to do that? What are some different techniques? So we have another plant growing experiment. This is more with annuals, not a perennial crop like the trees, where we are using an intentional subsoil. So this is fill dirt that has, we did a soil analysis on it, 0.09% humic material. So almost zero organic material. Okay, so organic material would do this job otherwise. Two of these plots are amended with biochar at a 10 to 20 metric tons per hectare rate, and then they were charged with effluent from an anaerobic digester. So this is one of the other waste to energy and waste recycling projects that we're looking at. And we have seen, even with some charging, we have seen the negative effect on a couple different crops. We started this last year, and so we planted a winter crop rye. We saw some, you could just tell visually that one of the crop without the char was actually doing better. So even the char was even pulling some of the nutrients away. So we're looking at that. What is the minimum amount of charging that needs to happen to be able to be used? We have eggplant currently in these plots as well, and you can see very clearly the picture that the bottom picture that's actually has a char treatment is underperforming, or the control is actually outperforming this. So this is again some empirical evidence about the importance of aging, allowing the char to develop the ability to hold on to these nutrients before applying it as an amendment. Okay, so I think I'm going to stop there, Sherry, and then pass it back over to you to talk about biochar in concrete.
Thank you, Jeremy. As Jeremy said, one of the main applications of biochar is for soil amendment. But during the past 3 years, the application of biochar as a construction material has gained a lot of attention. And one main reason is that we can say that construction industry is the main contributor to the total greenhouse gas emission, and concrete construction has a major role in the total greenhouse gas emission of construction industry. Concrete is the most used construction material. After water is actually the second used material in the world. And the annual concrete production crossed over 25 billion tons. So concrete is a commonly used construction material. You see it in infrastructure, residential, commercial, building construction, like parking, roads, different areas. You can see the use of concrete as a construction material. The production process is simple. Concrete is produced by mixing cement with aggregates and water and sometimes additives. But here you can see the contribution of concrete to the total greenhouse gas emission. Concrete is responsible for 8% of greenhouse gas emission. And that emission is coming from the materials that we use, cement and aggregate, the mixing process of ingredients together, transportation and placement on concrete. So we are looking at the emission of concrete as a construction material, right? The emission of concrete is coming mostly from mixing process and the material that is used for the production of concrete. The mixing process has very low emission. Compared to the mixing process, the emission of extraction of materials and the material that we are using in the production process is very high. So comparing mixing process and materials, we can see that materials have a significant effect. The majority of greenhouse gas emission in concrete construction is coming from the materials that we use. And as I mentioned in the previous slides, the three materials that are used in the production of concrete are cement, water, and aggregates. Again, between these three materials, cement is the one that is mostly responsible for greenhouse gas emission of concrete construction and concrete industry. 4.4 billion tons of cement was produced in 2021. 92 million tons produced in the US only. And therefore, because of that huge number, cement is responsible for 24% of global industry's CO2 emissions. And it's basically the main reason that concrete is responsible for 8% of global emissions. So that's why we need to look into different techniques that can be used to reduce greenhouse gas emission or carbon footprint of concrete industry. That's why we are looking at using biochar to reduce carbon footprint of concrete. Okay, so I mentioned that the main reason for greenhouse gas emission of concrete is the cement is coming from cement. Now let's look at the production process of cement to see where does the CO2 emission comes from to figure out a way to address that and reduce CO2 emission or greenhouse gas emission of concrete construction. The production process of cement includes the mixing of limestone, clay, and other materials together in a kiln and exposing those materials to very high temperature, more than 1400 degrees centigrade. Okay, so we have the energy, the emissions from the high temperature that is used for the production of cement. So that is called combustion. The emission from the energy used to fire the material. And then during this, when we mix limestone and clay, there is a chemical reaction. And during that chemical reaction, CO2 is released. So that is another step in the cement production process, which is referred to as calcination, which results in production of CO2. And this is basically why we say that cement is the major contributor for emissions of concrete, the 8% contribution of concrete to total greenhouse gas emission. So in order to reduce carbon footprint of concrete, we can do different things. There are different techniques that can be used, but one main approach is to reduce or replace cement that is used in concrete with more sustainable materials. So the aim is to completely replace cement, but instead of doing that right now, what we do is to partially replace cement with more sustainable material. A group of materials that are used to partially replace cement in concrete are industrial supplementary cementitious materials. Examples of industrial SCMs are fly ash, which is being used right now. It's being used as a replacement for Portland cement in the construction of concrete. Another example is ground granulated blast furnace slag. And the third example, as I have here, as an industrial SCM is silica fuel. So these are all byproducts of other materials. So instead of using cement, producing more cement, we are using materials that are waste. We are using waste material to replace cement. And that has a significant effect in reducing carbon footprint of concrete. Another group of SCMs that can be used to replace cement with the aim, again, to reduce carbon footprint of concrete are natural supplementary cementitious materials. So examples are metakaolin, sugar cane bagasse ash, and rice husk ash. As these are examples of natural supplementary cementitious materials. In our project, the project that we are working on right now, we are looking at biochar as a material that can be used to replace cement with the aim to reduce carbon footprint of concrete. Another technique that is being used is the use of PLC, Portland limestone cement, the PLC has a higher concentration of limestone, which results in a 10% reduction in CO2 emission of cement. So that's another technique that is being used right now to reduce carbon footprint of concrete. But as I said, in the project that we have right now at the Appalachian State University, we are looking at using biochar as a supplementary cementitious material. As Jeremy said earlier, biochar it has high content of carbon and it's a porous material. So an advantage for concrete application is that it can contain water and it can help with internal curing of concrete. But biochar has a very complex structure, and the structure of biochar depends on the type of feedstock that we use and the pyrolysis conditions that are used for the production of that biochar. Biochar is a material with high density carbon storage possibilities. And as again, Jeremy mentioned earlier, it sequesters high volume of stable carbon in its structure. So we can use it to replace cement in the construction of concrete. And by that, we can help with reducing carbon footprint of concrete. But the important thing is that we need to look at properties of concrete, biochar concrete. It helps with environmental impact of concrete, but at the same time, we need to make sure that we are not affecting mechanical and physical properties of our concrete. So what we do for biochar concrete, we mix aggregate, sand and gravel with water, with biochar. And because biochar usually has a negative impact on workability and a slump of mixture, you end up using superplasticizers to help with the improving workability of mixture. Then we replace some of the cement with biochar, and then we mix everything. Then you place that mixture and make your concrete. So for our project at Appalachian State University, we obtained our biochar sample from the Nexus facility. We have samples produced from softwood, hardwood, and arunda grass. This is an example of a sample that we obtained from Nexus facility for our biochar concrete project. We are basically using locally sourced wood and forestry waste in the production of biochar and then use that biochar in our concrete mixture. So for our project, the first thing that we looked into was physical and mechanical properties of our biochar, like different properties of our biochar. We basically characterize properties of our biochar. We looked into physical properties such as particles distribution, size of the particles, density of material, pH of the material. And we also used a scanning electron microscopy to be able to have a better understanding of the structure of these three biochar samples that we have. And as you can see in this slide, we have SEM pictures for arunda grass, for hardwood and softwood. And again, you can see that these biochar samples, they are very porous materials, and that's why we think that it can help with internal curing of our concrete samples. And also another thing that we did, we characterized our biochar samples using SEM EDS. So we looked at the elements in our biochar samples that we have to figure out the elemental structure of our biochar sample. And as we expected, we noticed a high content of carbon in our biochar samples. So after doing characterization of biochar, then we designed a concrete mixture using locally sourced sand and gravel, Portland cement, the biochar that we obtained from Nexus facility. We designed the mixture and we mixed our sample. We are doing wet conditioning, moist curing for 28 days, and then breaking our samples after 7 days of curing, 28 days of curing, 60 days, and then 90 days of curing to see how does the replacement of cement with biochar affect, most importantly, the compressive strength of concrete. We are also looking at the slump or workability of concrete mixture, and we are also looking at the rate of penetration, water or moisture penetration after 28 days of curing. So these are different types of tests that we are performing on our concrete samples to evaluate the effect of biochar on different properties of concrete to see what is the optimum percentage that we can use for replacing cement in concrete without negatively affecting the mechanical properties of concrete. So based on the previous studies, the previous studies, they showed that a 5% replacement of cement by weight with biochar improved the 28-day compressive strength of mortar by 10%. So we are doing 5%. That was the optimum biochar content based on the literature review, and that's the number that we are using in our study. Higher replacement rate, more than 5% of weight of cement caused a significant decrease in the flowability of biochar mortar. An increase in tensile strength, a decrease in water penetration depth, and a reduction in sorptivity may be achieved by using biochar to partially replace cement in concrete construction. So as I mentioned, there is a benefit in replacing cement with biochar, and that is the reduction in carbon footprint of concrete construction. But at the same time, it is very important that we look at the mechanical properties of concrete. Based on the previous studies, we know that 5% is the optimum percentage, which is a low number. So we are looking into ways that we can increase the percentage of cement replacement with biochar. Based on the previous slide, I mentioned that 5% was the limit, but by looking into different techniques that I have in this slide, we are trying to increase that number from 5% to a higher number to increase the environmental impact of biochar concrete and reduce carbon footprint of concrete. So one thing that we are doing, this is a current project that we are looking at, the addition or the use of biochar in combination of other supplementary cementitious materials. We are working on a project right now that we use biochar in combination of metakaolin and nanocalcium carbonate. So biochar has its environmental benefits. It sequesters carbon. It replaces cement, helps with reducing carbon footprint of concrete, but there is a negative side to it, which is the decrease in compressive strength of concrete. We add other supplementary cementitious materials to compensate for the loss of compressive strength in biochar concrete. So that is the project that we are working on. 5% replacement of biochar or cement with biochar, and at the same time, different percentage of metakaolin and nanocalcium carbonate to replace cement. Another approach that's being used is the biochar immobilized bacteria for self-healing concrete. So self-healing concrete also gained a lot of attention during the last decade. A lot of researchers are working on self-healing concrete. And as I mentioned earlier, biochar is a very porous material, so it can be used as a carrier for self-healing material for concrete. It's the same approach is being used also for soil amendment, and the same concept is being studied for self-healing concrete. So biochar immobilized bacteria for self-healing concrete is another application for biochar as a construction material. And there is another project going on at Washington State University. So in order to compensate for loss or reduction in compressive strength of concrete due to use of biochar as a partial replacement of cement, they treat their biochar with concrete waste water that will add more calcium to biochar, and then it can help with a strength gain of concrete during the hardening process and during the curing of concrete. So they are looking into biochar strengthened beforehand with concrete wastewater. So they basically use concrete wastewater. They're using a waste material to enrich biochar with calcium and then use that material to replace cement in concrete construction, which has their results showed that it can help with loss of compressive strength when we use biochar in concrete. So these are very interesting projects going on right now. We are working on this, the first one that I mentioned, different types of SCMs at the same time as biochar, but there are other very interesting projects going on. I think that was my last slide. Yes, thank you again for this opportunity to present our work.
Thank you for our presenters. Now we will open it for questions. So any question? So we have a question in the chat. Do you know of any recent construction where biochar supplements were used in the project, industrial or commercial, or is it still just in trial-like stages?
It's still in trial. So when we are using these materials for construction application, we have to go through the process and like basically get it certified before we be able to use it as a construction material. So it's mostly still in the research area and trial area. So I don't know of any actual project that they use biochar for their construction project.
Okay, great. Any other questions? Okay, I have a couple of questions. So have you looked at the cost benefit of using the biochar?
So for concrete application, that's our next step. We are after defining an optimum process for the production of biochar in combination with other SCMs. We were looking into doing an LCA and a life cycle cost analysis too, to actually, look at the cost benefits of using biochar with or without other SCMs in concrete construction.
Right. Okay. Another question. Also, have you looked at the application on asphalt with asphalt, or you are just focusing on concrete?
We are focusing on concrete, but they are using biochar for asphalt applications too. But right now at our department, we are only looking at
concrete.
Concrete, yes.
Okay, thank you. So we have a question in the chat. concerning biochar for soil conditioning, can you use wood ash from fireplaces to supplement composite to improve lawns and plant beds?
Yes, John, the wood ash from your fireplace will have potassium in it. Potassium is a macronutrient that all plants need. However, it will also have the effect of raising the pH. So you do want to be careful about pH. Plants have an optimal pH range, usually in the between 6 and 7 for most of our common garden and field crops. So putting too much ash can jeopardize the pH of the soil. It's not that big of an issue for places like North Carolina where we get a lot of rain, but it is something to be to think about. But yes, in general, that's a good thing. Wood ash is good to put in compost.
Okay, great. Another question. Have there been any concern addressed regarding air emission during the startup and burning process of the biomass?
I can speak to that. That is absolutely when the most emissions are produced is at the startup process. Also, the ending process, depending on what type of infrastructure or type of a pyrolysis system. But usually in the beginning, just like if you're building a fire, you don't have complete combustion yet because you don't have sufficient temperatures. So there is particulate material and other incomplete combustion products. So that is a good question, how to address that. And commercial large scale, which we're, I think, at the very beginning of seeing the investment in large scale biochar facilities, I think they will be required to address those emissions just like any kind of large scale emitter like a power plant.
Okay, we have a couple more questions. Please give me an example of the charging or treatment that is needed prior to applying biochar to crops.
Okay, so the best way to inoculate or charge biochar, charging usually means the inorganic part, like getting nutrients, and inoculation is usually referred to the biological component, like the beneficial soil bacteria. The simplest way to do that would be to have char that's relatively small particle size, that's crushed up or ground up, and apply that to compost, maybe in a 5 to 10% by volume ratio in compost, and allowing that to age or season over 6 months or more. That's going to be a very effective way to do that. In the study that we're looking at, we're trying to accelerate that process and get that down into 24 to 48 hours. And we're looking at things like compost tea, or in our case, we were using effluent from anaerobic digester.
Okay, last question from John again. Does it make a difference between clay soil or pyodominant versus coastal, loamy, sandy soils?
Absolutely, there will be a difference depending on your soil. The texture of the soil makes a big difference. The clay is going to have a better cation exchange capacity, but may not be as well drained. The coastal loamy soils or sandy soils will have good drainage, but have less organic material. Remember that biochar as a soil amendment is like adding compost. Okay, it has the same benefits that organic material will have, and that does benefit either clay or sandy soils for different reasons. Clay because it allows for more aeration and drainage, and sandy soils because it does a better job holding water.
Okay, great. Any other questions? When you mention certification, is there a minimum amount of time required before application for the project biochar can be submitted?
Well, we need to go over the specification and produce the material that meets the specification. So it has a whole procedure that we need to follow. But as I mentioned, this is just in the research steps right now. So we need to finalize the production process, the mixture design and everything to produce a concrete mixture that meets all the specification, and then we can certify the material and use it for the construction project.
Thank you. Any other questions? So a question to Sherry, are you also exploring the use of biochar in combination with industrial waste like steel slag?
Not right now. As I mentioned, the current project that we have is just the combination of biochar with metakaolin and calcium carbonate.
Thank you. Awesome presentation, very interesting. Yes, it's very interesting. So for those who are asking about the video, the recording will be available. So you can access that. We will make a link available for everyone. And it will be available on the center website. Any other questions? Okay, thank you very much. It was a great presentation. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you.
All right.